1983, after about 5 years of prosperity and success, video games were in danger. Console and game sales were dwindling rapidly, and while a number of factors were involved in the industry's decline, many tend to point the finger at Atari's E.T., the extraterrestrial, as well as other quickly produced cash-grab games released around the same time, such as the Atari 2600 port of Pac-Man. It failed to sell, and Atari, after burying around 700,000 unwanted copies of the game in a New Mexico landfill, fell from glory. For the next 2 years, consumers were fed up, and while Atari technically managed to survive, many home computer and console companies did not, and filed for bankruptcy. Then came a game called Super Mario Bros., a platformer from the mind of revolutionary game designer Shigeru Miyamoto, creator of the successful Donkey Kong arcade game. It brought together all the elements that made his previous games great while adding new elements, such as the addition of a scrolling screen, instead of the usual fixed single screen. It was a massive success and often credited for the NES's high sales. It was the highest selling game for 24 years, selling over 40,000 million copies. Its incredible influence is obvious even today, and it's considered the game that saved the industry. So why is it that no one remembers when it came out in the US? By the end of 1984, the Famicom was flying off store shelves in Japan, and it was time to gear up for launch in the United States. After Nintendo of America, led by Minoru Arakawa, showed the product to American retailers, they found pushback due to the recent memory of the crash, which found consumers unwilling to take a risk on home video game systems. The NES did so poorly in its initial market research that Arakawa doubted if they should go ahead with it at all. But on the suggestion of his father-in-law / Nintendo of Japan president Hiroshi Yamauchi, he decided to conduct a test launch in New York City. Yamauchi insisted that they start with the most difficult market to enter, and that once consumers got to try the NES, they would have no problem selling them. A small group of Nintendo employees did everything they could to promote the console from October to Christmas Eve of 1985. They set up decorations and would demonstrate games to potential buyers. They even promised to buy back any unsold stock from stores. The test was fairly successful, however stock wasn't selling as much as they would have hoped. Initially, the NES launched in a box which included Rob, a Zapper, and 2 game packs, Gyromite and Duck Hunt. They found that, considering the attitudes toward video games at the time, it was easier to market the NES as a consumer electronics product, while emphasizing Rob and the Zapper to differentiate it from game systems that had come before. Alongside it were a handful of additional game packs available at launch, but confirmation of precisely what games were available on launch day is murky. We'll get back to this. Later, upon the NES's nationwide launch in 1986, you had the choice between 2 NES bundles, the control deck, just including the console itself, or the deluxe set with all the original extras. By the end of the year, Super Mario Bros. Was made a pack-in game, most famously as part of the NES Action Set in a dual game pack alongside Duck Hunt. This is when the NES began to have the cultural impact that we have all heard about or remember, as NES saw a massive surge in sales. Super Mario Bros. Was originally available before this, but we just don't know when. The general consensus from people is that the game came out in 1986. Employees of Nintendo of America at the time, Howard Lincoln, Howard Phillips, and even Arakawa, said the game was not available at launch. Another Nintendo employee, Don James, said the game was available about 4 months later after the test launch. Tristan Donovan, author of Replay: The History of Video Games, vouches for a more specific time frame, March 1986. Even Miyamoto claimed that the game did not begin development until 1985, but Nintendo themselves, however, have the release date listed as the 18th of October, 1985. One of the only journalistic sources that we have from the time period is a Milwaukee Journal article from the 5th of October 1985. Edward J. Semrad was able to preview the upcoming launch titles for the NES, which included games like Excitebike, Wrecking Crew, and even Super Mario Bros. Unfortunately, it's not definitive enough evidence to make a conclusion about the release date of the game, as what Semrad experienced was just a preview of what Nintendo might be putting out later that year, and another list of launch titles, the Chronicle section of Nintendo's very own Super Smash Bros. Brawl, have 18 games listed instead of the 17, including Gyromite and Duck Hunt, specified by Semrad, and even includes games not mentioned at all in his list, such as Donkey Kong Jr. Math. So Nintendo is consistent with the idea that the game was available for that test launch, and there are a few other bits of evidence to support this. The VP of Sales for Nintendo of America at the time, Bruce Lowry, has stated that Super Mario Bros. Was definitely a part of the test launch. He has a memory of the very first purchase of an NES by a man who supposedly worked for a competing Japanese company. He bought all 15 games alongside the system. A Macy's advertisement from the 17th of November 1985 lists 15 games, including Super Mario Bros., potentially available to purchase at launch. And it's exactly the same as Semrad's list. Another is a warranty card, most likely from the test launch. There was a competition where the idea was that you would indicate the games you wanted to win on the warranty card and return it. On the list of games, Super Mario Bros. Another is a picture of a store display which includes pictures of the 15 games, including a picture of an underwater level of Super Mario Bros. So even though details of the launch lineup are murky, it seems there's enough evidence to come to the conclusion that Nintendo's release year of 1985 is most likely accurate, despite the personal accounts of certain Nintendo employees and historians. But where does the specific date of the 18th of October come from? We have a few conflicting accounts of when the NES had its first sale. The Milwaukee Journal article, published on a Saturday, the 5th of October, states that the console would be released next Tuesday, but it's not clear whether he is referring to the 8th or the 15th. Supposedly on the 10th, Nintendo had a launch party for the system, and many games were available to play. Nintendo employee Gail Tilden has this strange anecdote of remembering that famous Broadway actor Yul Brynner died the same day as the party. She also contests the accuracy of the 18th of October, a Friday, as she remembers that on the day of the first sale, she had a Bloody Mary to celebrate, and she's quite sure that she wouldn't be drinking on a workday. She believes that the first sale would have happened on a Saturday, like the 12th or 19th of October. Bruce Lowry told Gamasutra that the ship date was the 18th of October, but strangely, TV ads, as well as the story by United Press International announcing the NES, showed up on the 14th of October, a few days before this. It's normal for companies to release information and advertise a product before it has been shipped, but employee Tilden can't remember if that was the case for the NES. So perhaps the 18th of October isn't the release date, but more so the date it arrived in stores. Even though there's virtually no written evidence, the personal accounts of employees suggest that it is likely that the NES, alongside Super Mario Bros., became available and made its first sale on the 19th. Uh-oh. Bad news. Unfortunately, there's one final twist to the story. One of my main sources, an article on gamasutra.com by Frank Cifaldi, mentions that just before publication of their story, they received an anonymous tip from a reliable source with access to some kind of internal database, saying that although the ship date of the NES is the 18th of October 1985, the date for Super Mario Bros. Is listed as the 17th of November 1985. Cifaldi points out that this date would also coincide with the first advertisement that showed up for the game, a Macy's store ad from the 17th of November. Also, the manual for Super Mario Bros. Has a given publication date of the 31st of October 1985, so I guess that could be it too, because even though the assumption that the game came out the same date as the NES has kind of fallen apart, it would have still been released for that test launch. So at least we sort of have a time frame of when the game was released? I don't know. Ah well.